Hey there, Transformers. Welcome to Work Transformed, the podcast that tackles the ever-evolving world of product development, project chaos, and everything in between. Each episode, we'll dive into the hottest trends, unpack the latest tools, and chat with inspiring guests who are leading the charge. So, buckle up, get ready to transform your work, and let's do this.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Work Transformed. I'm joined again with my longtime co-host, all the time friend, Jackie Bittner. And it's me, Noah. Hello everybody. Get ready for another roofing conversation. Today we're going to talk about continuous improvement. And for those of you all who may not be familiar with this, because, everybody doesn't know everything. You might not know. Continuous improvement is really this notion or principle that you can always be looking to inspect and adapt, always be looking to improve the way you are functioning. And a lot of times it's referred to in the agile sense of like, hey, let's look at our team and see how can our team be better? Or, hey, let's look at this process and figure out how this process can be better. But you can you can learn things from it too. But you can use this principle of continuous improvement literally in all parts of your life. You can use it in your relationships. You can use it in your daily job. You can use it in your hobbies. Like, you literally can use this everywhere. And so I think it's important that we take some time to talk about, like, what does this look like? How do you do continuous improvement? And where can it bring more value to you? So
yeah. And like, what ways can you adopt a continuous improvement mindset? Because there's multiple thoughts out there on how we are and how we ingest our experiences. And so this is a great topic. And I think this is something that Thomas in our positions previously held and future positions to be held. This is something that we're constantly like thinking about in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just related, like you said, to echo what you said, not just to how our teams are functioning, though that is a good reason to use it, but even as we did launch that episode about people and personal development, professional development, there's a lot of continuous improvement practices in there as well. All right, so where should we start?
I think so often we talk about things from like the organization's perspective or your team's perspective, all these other like external places. I want to start with self. Like, how can continuous improvement be important for individuals in general?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on a couple of things, starting with the self.
I love the fact you jumped right in, because it really wasn't. It sounded like a question, but it was just like my thought. It was like, oh, I think I want to start there.
Oh, I think it's a great starting point. Listen,
you got an answer, so go for it.
Listen, my all the time friend, I would love to follow you down this path of starting with the self. Some things bubble up in my mind about it. It's really like, first, how do you like change that internal dialogue to get to that continuous improvement mindset? So maybe I got excited because this applies to what I'm currently trying to do with my 4-year-old, and that is introduce him to a sport that I used to play and figure out it's tennis.
And I actually just found out you played tennis. I think you just told me this last week, or maybe last week. So it's amazing how quickly it's come up in a podcast.
Well, it's something that I found a lot of joy in, and even that experience, there was a lot. Like, I tell my son this story all the time because I want him to know that he's just starting, and there is no like perfect expectation. The first time I ever played tennis was with my best friend growing up. And we had met another friend on the court that was like really good at playing tennis. And her and I stood there with our rackets and had ball after ball just like whiz by our face because we had no idea what to do. So like when we started playing, we were awful, like dirt, terrible tennis players, didn't even know how to hit the ball, couldn't keep it in bounds. And so I tell my son this story a lot because he's just navigating this brand new thing and he's excited by it. And he mostly likes to run around the court and throw the tennis ball to me. And every now and then he'll pick up a racket, but I could tell there's a nervousness associated with it because he's not just organically good at it. And so this continuous improvement mindset comes into play even at this level because it's like, hey, give it a try. Hey, what did you learn? Hey, how did it feel when you hit it versus how did it feel when you woofed around in a circle? Um, and then, more times on the court later, going back to, oh man, you hit it 2 times this time instead of the 1 time last time. You've improved. You're going to continuously improve. And he likes to say, well, you're really good, Mom. I'm not really good. Side note, I can just hit the ball. But I like to remind him, like, yeah, remember that story about when I first started? Poof, I was not very good, but I continuously tried to improve and I got to this point. So you could get there too.
And actually, your story makes me think that continuous improvement actually starts out one step before the you acknowledging that you could be better and like figuring out ways to do it. I think it starts with the step of giving yourself permission. As silly as that sounds, like why do I have to give myself permission to think about ways I can be better? In some ways, I think we hold ourselves back because to in order to do continuous improvement well, you have to acknowledge that sometimes things did not go well, or things maybe went okay, but they could have been better, or they went good, but they could have been great. And so, like, you have to acknowledge that there was room for improvement, and that's hard sometimes because you know, we sometimes get so fixated on perfection that we lose sight of the journey of getting there. And so sometimes we have to step back and say, this is a journey. It doesn't matter where I am on the journey at this moment. The only thing I need to acknowledge is that I am on the journey and I want to be better. And like giving yourself that permission before you step into, okay, what can I do better? Because I think that releases you from saying, oh, I did everything as best I could. So like there's not really anything I could have done better. To say, I did do everything the best that I could in this moment, but I realized maybe there were some external factors at play that made me not be able to do more things, or maybe emotionally I did as best I could in this current mindset because I'm anxious or I'm depressed or I'm frustrated. But I need to do some things to get out of this mindset, or it opens you up to the
Yeah.
possibility. Even if you did indeed do the best you could this time, that doesn't mean that this best you could is the same best that you could tomorrow.
It's almost like a mantra, like I did my best and I can improve. Like I did my
Uh-huh.
best, I feel good, and I can improve. You said a word that landed for me too, like that goes along with this giving yourself permission to improve through practice. You use the word like perfection. We don't aim for perfection, or at least in our environments in the working world, is like the goal is never perfection. The goal is always to improve. And so, those of us who have like that experience of wanting to be a perfectionist, that's, I think, where that permission comes into play. Don't be a perfectionist, be an improvementist, or
Yeah, I
whatever
like
that
that.
is, right? Like, oh, so cool. So starting with yourself, giving ourselves permission to improve. Um,
But then you said something else when you were talking to Syl about how Syl said that you were so good and he's not. And I think sometimes we also get into this comparison mode. Like once we're in the swing of things and we've given ourselves that permission and we're really actually trying hard to be better people, instead of looking at our current situation and circumstances to find out what in our control we could do differently or better, we
mhm.
start looking externally at like what other people are doing or have done and saying like, oh, comparing what I did to what they did, it's not as good. And I've actually learned, even in the professional world, like doing the exact same thing as someone else may give you entirely different results. And so I often find that saying like, oh, this person's so much better, I'm gonna just emulate them, and using that to continuously improve is not always the right method because it's not necessarily leaning into your strengths. It's not acknowledging where you may be weak at because maybe the way that that person excels is a significant weakness of yours. And so you will just struggle so much doing it just like that person is doing it. And so sometimes we have to think about, I see that Jackie's really great at tennis. She hits the ball every time. And I admire that in her. I would like to get to that level. However, I know that my next step is just figuring out how do I make contact with the ball. Like, let's just start
Yeah.
there. And for me, she's doing, I don't know what the things are called in tennis, but like she's hitting the ball, like she's serving it with her forearm, but I might need to serve it, I don't know, a different way. because
I
I need
can.
to play to my strength. Thank you.
Yes,
That is the extent of my tennis knowledge.
you're so good at it. No, but you're
No.
absolutely right. Like there is this thought that like competition, there can be like healthy competition, right? To motivate people. But if you're on this like improvement journey, that like one-to-one comparison isn't super helpful because then you're not focused on your improvements. You're focused more on what somebody else is doing. I read this thing the other day on the internet, on the social media internet, that said something to the effect that flowers don't bloom to outshine other flowers. They just bloom to be themselves. And
Oh,
like
I
that's,
love it. Say it again.
yeah,
Say it again. I love it.
flowers do not bloom to outshine other flowers. They bloom to be themselves. And that's what the continuous improvement self journey would be, is you focus on yourself and make those small changes there. The other thing, side note with the tennis stuff, and we can maybe move on, but when my son's throwing
What
the
do we
ball
mean?
at.
Are you trying to imply that I am out of my depth in this example? Because I'm clearly not. I'm holding my
You
own over
don't
here.
understand. You're doing great. You would be an amazing tennis partner. You have the right mindset and you already know about serving and volleying. Like, that would be great.
Look, you acknowledge that, but we can move on now.
well, something when my son is nervous about the racket and he's throwing and enjoying throwing the ball to me, sometimes I hit that ball and it goes straight into the net. It does not go over. It does not go in. And I also like to call that out to him. Like, hit it in the net again. I wonder what I need to change, or I wonder what I need to try. And I like to say those words to help kind of like instill, like, I am not just innately bad at playing tennis. I can improve. I need to try. I need to experiment with my form. I need to maybe swing a little earlier, or I need to, run a little faster to get to the ball in time, or whatever that may be. And so those like using that terminology with yourself, like what can I try or what can I experiment with, can help you adopt this continuous improvement mindset a little more readily, a little more at the helm, which
Mm-hmm.
then should trickle in to adopting it in other areas, like your work life.
Mm-hmm. So I'll give a real life example of personal life, how continuous improvement can help. I am very glad that in this podcast you cannot see my desk. And honestly, I have my webcam set up in such a way that even if you could see me, you could not see my desk for the most part. And that's because it is a tornado 90% of the time. It is just like a tornado because bills come, I'm like, I need to pay this, put it on my desk. Uh, other stuff comes in, I'm reading, I leave it on my desk. I have things I print out because unfortunately I am still very archaic. I print out everything. And so like I'm reading this, I stack it on the desk. So there's like 50 piles of papers on my desk at any given time. And it's one of the things that I am working on personally from a continuous improvement perspective is like, how do I do a better job of maintaining order on my desk?
Yeah.
And I have to continue to give myself grace because, again, going back to the first tenet, I have acknowledged that this is a journey. It is about the destination, and as far as like that is the goal and how I continue to identify areas of opportunity. But I know that I'm not going to go from 0 to 100 overnight, and so like I have to continue to give myself the grace to say you're doing better, or in some cases you're not. Like sometimes continuous improvement is not always about like thinking of new ideas of how you can improve. Like some days I come in, I'm like, I have told myself from now on I will put all mail in this one sack. And I have 3 sacks of mail. Thomas, you have to do better. And so it's just reminding myself that I've made an agreement, in this case with myself, but like I've made an agreement to operate in this different way. And now I have to hold myself accountable to doing that. And so
Yeah.
a small example, but it's just like in your life, there are all these things that you want to do better. Like start identifying ways to do them better. In my case, keep my desk clean. I have an organizing system. I have this new thing where now when mail comes into my house, I don't even I used to just bring all of it down and just like put it in a pile and I'll sort through it later. If I can tell something's immediately junk, I literally throw it away like at the door. Like I stand at the door and I open up things real quick. I don't open up everything because some things I know that like if this says ComEd, it's my bill. So like I know that that's a bill. I don't need to open that right now. But, like some things you can just tell from the outside of the envelope. You're like, this is trash. I open it, I confirm it's trash, I throw it right away. And so like, that now has already reduced the volume of things that can even make it to my desk. And so like that's an example of how I am applying this to my personal life.
Oh my gosh, something that just like shouted at me while you were going through this mail on your desk scenario is you talked about inspecting and like sometimes you hadn't improved. And
Mhm.
this is now what I've inspected and now I have to try something new. And really what stood out to me is like the way you look at failure if you tried something and it didn't work. Like,
Mm.
you looked at failure not as this, like, "Oh, well, now I'm never gonna have a clean desk." Like, you didn't say that. You said, "Well, this didn't work. I need to try something different with how mail comes into the house now. Like, when it gets into the house, what do I do? I'm gonna try this system, and then I'm gonna inspect that system." Because failure, the F word, hits people, man, hits people
It's
in all
funny because
different ways.
my mindset doesn't like views failure so dramatic. Like failure is like there's almost nothing that can be done at this. Like you've gotten to the point where there is no interventions possible. You are getting evicted from your house. There's no way the bank will ever let you keep it. Like you don't have any friends, you don't have any family. Like you are just now homeless on the street. And I empathize and sympathize with anyone who that has been the case for. Like I view failure as like there is no immediate recovery from this. And so when you said, "Oh, it's so interesting how you view failure," yes, that's your voice in my head.
Oh
Um,
my
I was
gosh.
like, when did I
Aw.
talk about failure? And so I think for me, that's an important lesson to call out for some folks because some folks do view failure very differently. Like I was supposed to do this, I didn't, therefore I failed. And I think if you have that mindset, it makes continuous improvement hard because you're always demeaning yourself, you're always getting frustrated with yourself. And we'll switch over to teams pretty soon, and the same can be said about teams. And so I think you want to make sure that you don't equate lack of progress to failure because life is hard.
True.
Life happens and it's going to continue to happen. And sometimes things get in your way and you just need to reorient yourself. Sometimes you might need to try a different tactic. All of that's okay. I wouldn't even call it failure. I just say there's opportunity to do things differently. And I think that helps with some of the cognitive load or the brain weightiness of doing this stuff.
That's exactly it. It's the opportunity to do things
Mhm.
differently. Hey, this didn't work. All right, I have an opportunity to try something new. Or depending on the thing that didn't work, I have an opportunity to pause this for a little while
Yeah.
because this is not working, you know? Do you remember? I know this is going to go like way off topic, on topic, but way off of like the self improvement thing. Something that you and I both experienced was like this term of failure and how like leadership tried to make it okay to fail. And they gave out the awards to fail fast to really
Oh,
like promote like a culture like it's okay to try something and fail. Like, but what did you learn and how are we doing things differently? Um, I really enjoyed that because of the way that failure gets tagged to like a negative connotation with teams or a blame game across like different teams or people. It, like for me, that gave me a tool to use to like diffuse some of those scenarios. Like if something did fail and people were feeling pretty angry or wanting to, you know, attack the team that did it or whatever it was. I really enjoyed having that. Like one is a thing that we promoted, but two is also something as like a talking point, like, hey, we value this actually. Yes, this is frustrating. You can be frustrated, but we also now need to figure out what's actionable here. What can we do to improve and not experience this pain again, or like whatever that is.
yeah, I think that it helped also change the culture around feeling because in just as hard as you are on yourself when you feel personally as something you want to do, it's even more awkward when you fail publicly at work with at something, even as a team, because it's like we had this goal, we didn't meet it. These are the people who were responsible for not making us meet. Like it just feels so bad. So to celebrate, maybe celebrate's not the right word because we weren't like, yay, we failed. Like it wasn't necessarily that. But to acknowledge that even in failure, there are learnings and lessons. And very rarely in my career have has my teams ever failed and we had nothing to show for it. Usually, like you fail and you delivered a week late, or you failed and you only had part of the value that you were trying to deliver. Like there was still something in the failure that was a good. And so highlighting and showcasing how even though the team wasn't successful for their goal, they still got something that was more valuable in some cases. Uh, I think that is helpful. Let's actually talk about that though. Let's talk about teams. Like it's
All
one thing
right.
to say, I myself know I could be better in this area. I'm going to take this 1 or 2 steps and then I'm going to, check in with myself in a month and see how that's going. It's very different when you are a person among many people on a team. And I really want to talk about this maybe even from a non-leadership perspective, because I think it's slightly easier to be a leader, like a team lead or a manager or someone, and come in and tell the team we need to do better. And like they will listen, they will identify areas of opportunity because they're kind of forced to. Like you're their boss, you say we're going to do this, they're going to do it. But I love to
Yeah.
think about like how can just folks on the team who are like this team could be so much better and it is not, and no one's doing anything. How can they really rally around fixing this? And to me, I'm going to start this off.
Okay.
Uh, I am a relationship builder at heart. I said this in job interviews. I said this like in people in general. Like that is my one value. I can't build you, a mobile app. I cannot do your taxes and balance the books. I cannot go out. I'm probably not the best salesperson, but I'm a great relationship builder. And so for me, especially when you're not in a position of power or authority per se, it's helpful to start by making connections with other folks on the team and lobbying interest. Because first of all, you probably want to validate that what you're feeling is felt across the team. So I've been in teams where I was like, this everything's moving too slow. Like we really should be moving faster. And everyone on the team was like, this is the fastest team I've ever been on. And so it was like, it would have been a little insulting to be like, hey guys, we got to move faster. If they
Right.
legitimately felt like this is the fastest team I've ever worked on. And yes, it maybe could go faster, but like, let's at least celebrate that this is already going well. You might want to start talking to your peers and just see like, hey, how are you feeling about things? How are things going? And if you're finding that other people are sharing the same frustrations as you, start to rally those people together in larger and larger circles. So maybe just you and your one colleague at first, and then you talk to a different person. The three of you all have a conversation, and start making the circle bigger, because the more you can rally support, I think the easier it's going to start to be to like get people to agree to make change. I don't know, Jackie.
Well, yeah, no, I'm just gonna like pick that up right there because what you're doing by rallying all these folks that have like a common desire to make a change is like you're empowering them. And then I would even take it a step further to allow, like, instead of like the team lead coming down to say, this is how you fix it, like let those folks come up with what they want to try as the solution. And that's like the
Mhm.
whole point of like the retrospective. If you're practicing Scrum, you can do a retrospective outside of Scrum. But like that is the point, is to identify those things, those problem areas, or those things you will just want to see different. And you're in the driver's seat. What do you want to try in order to make it a better place? And I think outside of relationship building, I think there's a level, depending on your environment, of bravery if you're on a team that you have to show if you've never had these types of conversations. Like you're gonna have to be the one that says, this release cycle isn't working. These are the challenges I'm seeing. I want to take an action to look at this further and maybe come up with something to try.
Mhm.
And that's scary if you've never been in an environment that allows for that kind of autonomy, uh, to change like the team dynamic or the setting. But if you have those supports in place, or if you're willing to be the brave one, like that's the step to continuously improve how you're practicing together.
The other thing, and this ties in with this, like, other Agile or specifically Scrum principle of like having these regular retrospectives. One of the things I've
Hmm.
learned is that when you give people an opportunity to share their frustrations in an environment that truly is safe, so like they don't have fear that they're going to say something and then there's going to be retaliation afterwards, and they don't have fear that people are writing down their names and associating it with the comments. If you give people that safe environment to really say is on their mind, even though I would say the first 10 minutes are going to be the most uncomfortable because like that's what everyone's going to have. They're going to say, oh, I don't actually have anything to say. I think everything's okay. Like it's fine. once you get through the awkward silence of no one wanting to be the first person to air their grievances, then you get to the heart of the good stuff. And and I know sometimes people are like, well, what's the value of having people vent if nothing's going to change? Well, here's the real fun part.
Ding,
Once you
ding,
give
ding.
people the time box of like, we're only going to vent for 30 minutes. Like, we're not going to vent for this whole meeting. Once you get to that cutoff and you're like, hey, folks, every single person has said time tracking is miserable. Like, how we track time is just so hard and convoluted and painful. Like, what could we do to make it better? And a lot of times the first thing people are going to say is like, nothing. Like, we don't handle time tracking. That's the finance team. We just kind of got to do what they say. And you say, okay, well, what if that wasn't true? Or like, what other ideas do we have? Maybe we can tell the finance team, here's some other options. When you let people actually be a part of the solution, you start getting some really profound and interesting things, because even though you're not in charge of the finance team, like if you're in a group of developers, maybe you develop your own app and it interfaces with the finance team's app and you can like work differently and it's less cumbersome. Maybe the answer becomes like, we will reduce some research and provide a list of 3 other tools that we can use, and like the finance team can pilot that. Maybe it's we'll just do a review with the finance team so they can themselves see what we go through. Like, the options are endless, and you'd be surprised how creative people are going to get when they are asked what they think should be done versus being told how it has to be done.
Honestly, that last one, like, can we just do a review with the team that gets these inputs so they understand how painful it is to do this process? Because that's just a relationship builder, honestly. You still need the inputs, but
Yeah.
if the people that are asking for them have like an empathy for the people that need to provide them, then the communication between the two groups change. And like that already improves that environment. Like it didn't
Uh-huh.
solve necessarily the entire this is a hard thing problem, but it did solve a this is a hard relationship problem, right? Like improvements can be done everywhere. Like you said in the
Uh-huh.
beginning, it's not just tied to one thing, and it's important to like maintain like that continuous improvement cycle because we're always looking for a better way, a good way, those voices at the table. You said so many things. I don't even know where to start. Um,
Well, I'm glad, because I thought I was just rambling.
oh man, I mean, you were just talking about I know we have approached psychological safety in a previous podcast, but we may not have like touched on it as much as
We could.
we could.
Uh-huh.
Yes, but like really truly if you're in an environment, especially with a retrospective where psychological safety exists, that's when you're going to get the best ideas on how to make changes. And like sometimes that leads to innovation too. Like sometimes that can lead to, well, we've been working on this
Absolutely.
product. Yeah, we've been working on this product and I know that the goal is to build this and this is the path that we've been on. I'm not afraid to fail, but look at this thing. Like, I think this path is failing because we could do this with this other path, right? And it generates these types of conversations.
Uh-huh.
Um, continuous improvement.
Well, the other
And
thing that came to mind, because we talked, some kind of way, the segue that got me here was failure.
oh yeah, go
um, but I will say this much: when you're working with a team, you have to have even more grace, in my opinion, when you work with yourself, because you're working with people who, because we're assuming best intent, who have a lot on their plate. Whatever the continuous improvement initiatives are that you all are doing is in addition to whatever they already had to do before. So you have to give them grace, because sometimes we say like, Jim's not even trying. We said everyone was gonna move to the Excel spreadsheet to do timesheets, and he's still using the app. Jim may legitimately not have time to learn how to do anything new at this very moment. Like, this week is horrible. He has all these deadlines. Jim's not trying to sabotage you, and every time now and then there may be a Jim that is trying to sabotage you, but we're still in best positive intent. Jim's not trying to sabotage you. Has anyone reached out to Jim? Has anyone talked to Jim? Has anyone tried to help Jim? And so I say that to say that there are going to be times where your initiative is moving real slow, and
mm,
you have to be resilient and not give up. You have to say, going back to that example we gave earlier, are there ways that we can maybe tweak this process even more? Do we
yeah,
just need to give ourselves grace and more time? Is everyone even aligned? Because the other thing is, maybe we picked something that only half the team thought was actually the best solution. And so the other team, half the team is actually sabotaging us. Not, not because they want us to fail. They're just like, I don't believe in this. I'm not even going to try. And so like, there are a lot of things you have to do when you're continuously improving. And a lot of it goes back to the fundamentals of just like having conversations with people, being open and honest, and then trying to get to a resolution that everyone feels comfortable with continuing to do.
And Jim is not trying to sabotage, but James, that guy is definitely sabotaging our progress. I really like what you said about the team level things, having like this like stronger layer of empathy and positive intent, because maybe Jim used the app because he was so frazzled and he knew the time had to get in. And like the approach the team could take with Jim, the team could take two approaches with Jim, really. A Jim, WTF, why are you using the spreadsheet? Which is probably not going to land very well for our stressed out friend named Jim. Or it could be like, hey, Jim, let me show you. Do you need a few minutes? I'm going to show you how we've moved it to the spreadsheet, and it's actually going to make your life a little easier, right? Like that positive intent for continuous improvement is so very helpful. I bring it back to the tennis thing. If I told my son, who is brand new at this thing, like, I told you to hit it over the net. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, he's not going to want to play tennis anymore. Jim's not going to want to work on improvements anymore if he just gets ridiculed for them. So we could deal with sabotagers in a different fashion, but the gyms that are trying, we love you, Jim.
And I think there's also a role. So I intentionally want to start off with how can just a team member and initiate continuous improvement activities, because I think in a lot of cases, the team members are the ones who see the processes, who see the communications, the tools, the interactions most clearly, and probably have the best solutions. But sometimes it will be a manager or leadership led, or sometimes there will be a need for a manager or a leader to sign off on it. I do want to come back to, because I always give managers such grief. Do better, managers, except those ones who are doing great. But this is another opportunity to do better. Like, I really want you all to support your team. I'll give a real life example. I was in a leadership capacity, and this team sent us a proposal to improve one of the tools that they use. It was an internal only tool that they use to produce the application that we sold.
Okay.
And they were just talking about all the pain points for them. They're like, oh, it's slow, it's cumbersome, it's this, it's that. And I sat in with the leadership team as we were discussing the proposal, behind closed doors. And we said no. And we talked about it extensively. And I think the way it was conveyed to the team was that, like, we didn't see value in it, but it was like the argument that the teams used was so inwardly focused that didn't seem valuable to us compared to other things. It was like, we have all these revenue targets we have to hit. We have all of these customer complaints, and to say like, oh, we're gonna make the life of 4 people easier, and then sacrifice, $2 million of revenue. The equation didn't balance. And I bring that story up to say, not because I think it was actually even the right decision necessarily, but to say that leaders need to work harder to partner with the teams who come up with these ideas to earnestly understand it. And I would always also say to champion it. Like, if one leader could champion it in those rooms where the other folks aren't going to be, that would be so much more helpful. Because I think in this case, there probably was some efficiency and productivity gains. There probably could have even been some revenue implications. But like, the team of developers has no clue about any of that. Like, they only know what they know, which is developing code. And so how a leader actually leaned in and said, hey, I just want to hear you all out. Like, tell me exactly what you all think. Did you all think about this? Okay, how do you all think this is going to impact this other department that's outside your purview? Like, if someone leaned in and helped them, it may have been a stronger, better business case, because not all continuous improvement activities can the team actually sign up for on their own. Like, some of them will need some level.
I was gonna say the business case, like leaders, that's where you can help your teams, is help them understand the mindset of some of those people into the senior leadership team. Like, if you have something you want to do, like to Thomas's point, like you were almost asking them more powerful questions. Well, if you do this, what departments are impacted? And if you do this, is there an efficiency gain? And, oh, here's some of the criteria for us prioritizing some of these things, do you meet any of it, or what can you contribute to it, right? That is such a great nugget of ways that leadership can show up for the teams. And then again, if you do that, you're building more trust and building more opportunities for improvement across the board.
Yep, absolutely. And I like to bring all of the podcast episodes together so that people can see that none of these things stand on the island by themselves. You're also building better trust with your team. I have rarely worked with teams who are like, I believe the senior leadership team knows what I do. I believe they have my best interest at heart. I believe they're great people. And they might be great people. They might have your best interest at heart, but like because they are so far removed from the what I'll say the boots on the ground, like very often there's a lack of confidence that leadership is going to do the right thing when push comes to shove. And so the more leaders and managers can lean in and say, I can't guarantee that this is gonna be approved, but what I will do is help you to put together like the best case that I can support so that you have the best odds. Like the more you do that, the more your team is like, I really trust Thomas. Like I know that last thing we put together, he wasn't able to get approved. But, like I could tell he was really invested in it because he had meetings with us. He like put together some of the slides for us. Like he did all these things, and I believe he really has our back. And like that's not gonna help continuous improvement necessarily, but it helps other parts of the business. It helps with retention. It helps with making sure that you have buy-in, you have better morale. Like there are all these other things that help, all coming from this what started out as a continuous improvement project.
That's awesome. I have a question because it has to do with it has to do with leadership, and it has to do with teams, and it has to do with this like almost like confidence in your leadership to be supportive of the work that you're doing as a team. And I want to go back to the failure concept. Does failing as a whole go against what the typical status quo is? And that's a leading question.
I was gonna say I'm nervous to answer. I feel like the answer is yes, it does go against the status quo. No one's ever like, I'm not going to business to fail. Like I think
Yeah.
success is always the goal in business.
All right, so now that we're aligned that this concept of failure goes against the status quo, what do leaders need to do to make sure that there's safety in failure? Like, I know that I pulled the example from like, well, way before when we were both wonderful colleagues together, is that there was actually prizes given for this fail fast concept among some other principles as well. But like, what other things do leaders need to do in the face of failure in order to encourage those teams for growth versus, setting them down and making them feel terrible?
This is where I think culture is important. We just had an article that we posted on our blog and on LinkedIn about organizational culture. But this is where I think you really have to know the culture of your organization to figure out where you start with embracing failure. Because to give out awards, for example, the Fail Fast Award for the team who failed fast and got up and like was able to use that learning to do something else, that works in a culture and atmosphere where people feel like they can be vulnerable to even share the stories, and a culture where like there is no concern that like they're going to fire me for failing.
There's no retaliation.
There's no retaliation. Like if your culture is one such that you all don't even have conversations about failure, everything you talk about is only in this red, amber, green framework where like either it's on track and needs intervention or it's like not doing well and it's red. I would not say that's a culture where you'd start by giving out awards. It's like you're never going to have any submissions. It's never going to be like a thing that people are going to write in for.
Then I would assume that that's a culture also that teams do not feel comfortable trying to make improvements because there's this nervousness of failure. Okay, continue.
So I would say I don't know why I always start from the most pessimistic perspective, but I'm going to assume that that's your culture. I think actually what would be the better starting point for you is going back to our last podcast, or not last podcast, like a couple podcasts ago where we talked about working iterations, because I think the more you can break down the work so that they, even in failure, only use a little bit of time and only use a little bit of resources, and then can say, like, here is exactly why this didn't go well. And you can verbally celebrate them. So you didn't ask them to prepare a presentation, but you just say, hey, team, I know this week we had a demo and we didn't get good feedback. Let's talk about, like, what happened. They're going to be still timid, but, like, the more you can be like, wow, that's amazing that they told us all that and we only drew up wireframes or we only did this thing. And, like, you just have to be so jazzed. And the first time you do it, they're going to think, oh, my goodness. First swear on the podcast.
Wah, wah, wah. We're going to bleep that out so no one's going to hear it, but that was amazing.
Well, it's like, I know that people are going to think you're crazy. They're like, why is that guy crazy? And he's so excited. And we told him the feedback was bad. Like, maybe he didn't hear us. And the more times that you can do that, because the risk of failure, the consequence of failure, not necessarily a risk, but the consequence of the failure is low. The more you can say, like, oh, that's great, that's great, that's great, the more people are going to be like, whew, okay, well, now that I know that they're not going to be upset, I'm going to actually suggest we do this other thing. And there's a 50-50 chance that it might fail, but I'm going to
Side note,
go ahead.
You said the word risk, and we just can't leave this point. Like, the consequence of failure is low when you work in iterations, but the risk of that failure being catastrophic is low when you fail fast. When you when you work iteratively, the failure becomes smaller, like just organically.
Mm-hmm.
But that means you can become more comfortable with it, and that means you can address those things head on. And so you are doing risk management, honestly, by working iteratively, because you're taking away this, like, long standing risk of the whole thing imploding if you are looking at these tiny things and have a tiny failure along the way. Ooh. Thank you, Thomas.
My absolute pleasure.
See, there's value in you coming in hot from the pessimistic angle.
But I'm curious now, let's say you're in a more open environment, like a lot of these smaller startup-y kind of, not startup-y, that's not the right word, but like smaller agencies do have a more open culture where they can discuss these things. Like, what would you recommend, Jackie, if your culture is a little bit more open to talking about areas of opportunity and challenges? Like, what would you suggest people can do to increase this continuous improvement mindset?
Yeah, I almost would encourage people to, like, showcase those failures if they're comfortable enough, because there is, honestly, if one team experiences something and there's an opportunity to showcase those lessons learned, it might be preventative in other teams going down that same path. So if we're talking, development teams that are working together, like, if one team experiences something, we need, like, a place to showcase it. I also, like, if the culture is, like, very open, I usually, like, lean on experimentation a lot more, because if there's these opportunities and the culture's open to this concept of failure, and there's something so cool that somebody wants to try, but they, like, have no idea if it's going to work, like, what's the small experiment you can do? Like, that's where I, like, really start to drive the importance of doing these smaller experiments up front before going down these, like, longer paths. I'm not sure that answers your question, but it is something that is exciting.
I think it does. I think, ultimately, there's no right or wrong. There's no. I always say
Well,
after that,
James is a sabotager, and he could be wrong.
So sometimes there could be a wrong. But there's no, like, singular right way to do it.
That's fair.
And so I think the bigger thing is to just try something. And in this vein of continuous improvement, if that something didn't work, don't give up. Just say, that wasn't the right thing. What else could I try? And I think more than anything, I want to leave you with this sentiment. In addition to just what else could I try, your question to yourself should always be, what else could I change or try in light of what I've learned from the things that I have tried? It's not like, let's take a shot in the dark. That didn't work. Let's shoot in the dark again. Even from that shot in the dark, you're like, hey, did I hear it ricochet off of something? Did I hear it, the bullet travel forever? Did it hit something? Like, what did I learn from that shot? That is a horrible one. Now, I should never use that.
We're just shooting in the dark over here, everybody. It's getting real wild.
What did you learn from that, and how can you apply that to the next thing you try? Because I have seen people do continuous improvement slightly, not greatly, where they're like, hey, I want to have my team come to the office more days a week. and they'll say, "Oh, I'll just like mention it in a meeting," and no, the behavior doesn't change because they just casually brought up in the meeting. And then they're like, "Okay, well then I'll send out an email." It's like, what did we learn from the meeting? No, like, well, from the meeting we learned that people weren't clear that this is a request. They thought it was just something you were talking about. And so, like, if you send out an email, is that going to make it clearer? Maybe. Like, what word choice will you use? And so, like, that's what I love you walk away with. It's what else can I try or implement based on what I already know or have learned.
Awesome. Shall we head
I'm
into
done.
the
That's
recap
it. Yep,
section?
it's all you.
All right. As always, my recaps are going to be sporadic and scattered because my notes are really all over the place today. But recapping continuous improvement. We learned that Jackie likes tennis and that Thomas has a journey to improve his desk cleanliness. But really, what we learned is there are some things within continuous improvement that start with yourself and start with your mindset. So the mindset is I did my best and I can improve. It's not perfectionist, it's improvementist, and that flowers don't bloom to outshine other flowers. They just bloom for themselves. We also discussed building better trust. And by building better trust, we meant by allowing teams to fail, you build trust with those teams that they get to experiment and improve. So we really talked a lot about failure, and failure is not a permanent thing. It is an opportunity thing to grow your continuous improvement practices, whether that's on the team level or personal level. On the team level, we talked about some different ways that you could build relationships within those teams to get them empowered to make some changes. So give them that autonomy, give them that purpose to make their team environment better. One thing we talked about from a practice perspective is this concept of retrospectives, which is part of Scrum. And in those retrospectives, if you're doing them, please make sure you take some time to understand psychological safety and that those in the room have it so that you could pull the best information and the best problems to solve from those people. We pivoted and we talked a lot about culture and how your culture really speaks to how you're going to embrace continuous improvement. So we talked about some examples from our world in our past about cultures that gave awards for failing fast and other ways to address cultures that may not be at that place just yet and how you can kind of make dents and be brave to share some of those things you want to see changed. I think that about wraps up these notes. They're really all over the place today. Thomas, what else?
No, there's nothing else. I just think this was. I don't toot my own horn often, but I think today's podcast was really hopefully helpful for a lot of folks because, like I said, this is not a businessy, corporate-y idea where it's like, oh, I don't work in that kind of job. It doesn't matter if you work in construction. There are things you can do better. If you work in retail, there are things you all can do better. Even in your personal life, there are things that could be better. So this hopefully is prompting you to do a little self-evaluation. So like, where are areas where I want to think about how do I continue to improve? And realize it's a journey. It's not a destination because even when you get to the place where you want it to be, today, by then that the goalpost may have moved. Like you've learned so much about yourself and so much about that domain space. And like you're like, I actually want to be even better than what I could envision 6 months ago. With that, I want to thank you all for listening again. As always, feel free to reach out if you all have questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, whatever. We'll always happy to hear it.
All right. Thanks, Transformers. Bye.